Hey guys, I want to tell you about one of my favorite new companies, and that is Rep Provisions. So I met these guys at PaleoFX last year where they were just blowing everyone away with their beef sticks and pecan nut butter combo packs that are outrageously delicious. But as I talked to them, I was even more blown away because I found out what they were about. They are a regenerative agriculture company committed to the future of the planet by the proper management of cattle. So they are regenerating America's grasslands with the management of their cattle. Look into it. It's amazing. They have everything from, of course, high quality grass-fed, grass-finished beef to Mongolisa pork, which is like the Wagyu of pork, to bone broth popsicles, pecan nut butters, like I said, and so many amazing things. Go support them and support the future of our planet. And they're giving you 15% off for being a Kick-Ass Life podcast listener. So use coupon code KICKASSLIFE and get 15% off at repprovisions.com.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a minute here at the top of the show to chat with you about some of our sponsors who are offering incredible discounts for you and your family. We also only align ourselves with companies that we know are providing safe and healthy products, and also products that we actually consume on a regular, if not sometimes daily basis. And one of those companies is Primal Kitchen. Primal Kitchen products are incredible because they are dairy-free, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free with no refined sugar. And they are delicious. So visit primalkitchen.com to check out the vast array of products available and use code KICKASSLIFE for 10% off. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kick-Ass Life podcast. We're going to talk about boundaries today in a variety of ways. I mean, I guess essentially I'll start off and say boundaries are authentically expressing your preferences. That's really what it is. And what we want to get to, there's lots of different modes of communication. There's passive aggressive, there's aggressive, there's, just assertive. And you really want to get to assertive communication because contrary to what people, might believe, assertive behavior evokes respect from others. The other styles do not. Okay. So when you are drawing boundaries and authentically expressing your preferences, it does reduce stress levels because passivity kind of goes hand in hand with the feeling of powerlessness, being overwhelmed. So we're going to get into this today. I want to start off with, something I was reading on this topic was saying, we're all endowed with sort of like some basic human rights that have to be respected and upheld. And so let me just kind of run through some of them. The right to express your feelings, your opinions, your values, your beliefs. Granted, if you live in certain countries, you can express those things. But here in the US, you are allowed to do that. You have the right to change your mind. Okay. So, and be open to that. You have the right to make decisions for yourself. You have the right to refuse if you don't know or you don't understand something. And you have the right to say no without feeling guilty. And you also have the right to be non-assertive. There are moments when you do not want to or shouldn't maybe assert yourself, and that's okay too. But basically, those are kind of like some basic rights, right? Right to privacy, personal freedom, things like that. And I guess I would just say, well, why would we all want to feel empowered, right? Like this empowering ourselves to authentically express ourselves, because without empowerment, you lack control over what you do, right? And so you lack confidence in yourselves and your direction. So you're usually relying on others to make decisions for you, whether it's your spouse, your colleague, your peers, etc. So you would be dominated by them then. You know what I mean? And so in contrast, when you're like empowered and you're on this train of drawing boundaries, you're fully in charge of what you do, what you want in life, and how to achieve it. So I'll just open it up there and then we can get into some specifics. But what do you think of when we talk about, creating boundaries and boundaries?
Man, you hit so many nuggets there. The ones that stuck out to me the most, first and foremost, is what you just said. And I'm living this. I will say with full transparency, I am going from in the middle of process of going from someone who really had almost no boundaries at all to learning how to have healthy boundaries, right? So I'm like still in that
Right.
learning process, and I can give myself credit for coming a long way, breaking old patterns, because it's very, very uncomfortable. It almost feels like you're violating your own safety, your own like basic needs as a human, like your own survival mechanisms, and like in a tribal mentality, when you start asserting boundaries that you haven't been taught how to do in a healthy way. Like it feels scary, truly. Like it feels scary when you start setting boundaries. So there's been some times and some ways that I've been really proud of myself. I'm like, dang, I have made some serious progress because I totally would have let that go on forever before. And I have other ways that I'm currently actively still seeing like, wow, I let way too much in, and there's still these pleasing behaviors, and there's still these like taking on things I don't need to take on, and getting overwhelmed with other people's stuff, and like, whoa. So I'm still learning. So I actually Elle suggested this topic, and I started laughing because I actually just purchased Mark Grove's Be a Boundaries Badass. I don't know if you guys follow Mark Groves, but you definitely need to. He is Create the Love on Instagram.
Wait,
And
what's his book? Because you and I are both, by the way, for everyone listening, we're both also look for it, because both Tara and I on our separate other podcasts where we interview people are going to interview Terry Cole, who wrote Boundary Boss, which is coming out, which is a great book. What's the name of this guy's book you just mentioned?
This is a course, and it's called something like Becoming a Boundaries Badass or something like
Nice.
that. Be a Boundaries Badass, something along those lines. Do you know Mark Groves?
I don't, but
oh my gosh.
Love the title of that book.
Oh, you will love him. Yeah. If you guys like us, like you will love Mark. Like he's really, really great. Yeah. We got to see if we can get him on Primal Blueprint. I have a connection with him. We'll make that happen. Okay. But anyway, he's wonderful. And so some of these notes that I'm talking about is because I'm literally in the middle of this course right now. And I thought there were some cool highlights that I would share with you guys. Hopefully he doesn't mind, but giving credit to Mark. So he talked about some different areas in which we can need to recognize what our boundaries are, need to be able to identify what our boundaries really are. And I think you hit the ball out of the park when you said it's like, I've learned it's almost kind of lazy, not identifying what you want or, what you think about things and just letting other people decide that for you. It's kind of easier. But then you end up being resentful because somewhere inside you,
it seems easy in the moment.
Yeah, but it's not easy. Yeah. So then you end up being resentful because you actually do want something and know but you're all confused and mixed up because you don't even know what you want. Like you're just all over the place. So identifying, and I'm definitely preaching to myself here too, but identifying. So one of the areas he talked about is emotional boundaries. So this is how I feel versus how you feel, right? And that's completely separate. So how I feel is my responsibility, and how you feel is your responsibility. And I see this get muddled a lot. It's like, and especially for me, even still, there's these patterns of I don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, I actually can't hurt their feelings. I can only speak my truth. And this is definitely stuff I've learned from doing the work of Byron Katie. But speaking your truth is actually kind. We think sometimes speaking our truth is going to hurt someone, and only they can choose if they're going to be hurt by that or not. But actually not speaking our truth is very unkind. I've learned, because it's stringing people along. They're confused. The energy's muddled. And so even if it feels quote unquote mean, and it will, if you haven't had boundaries to just tell the truth, it's actually loving, because now the other person knows exactly what they're working with.
Yeah. And also it's really reflective of it's when you're passive communicator, you feel poorly about yourself.
Yeah.
That's why you deal with people passively. There is still something there.
Yep.
And it's because you believe other people's opinions and feelings are more important than your own, at least in that moment. That's what your actions are showing. But that's not really what's inside, which is why you have that resentment that builds up later, which is why this game is a backfire mofo every time. And until you get to it. I also think too, when you're passive, you're unfortunately, like, one of the consequences of that is you're giving others the ability to make you feel lower. And then it's like furthering your shitty confidence in yourself. So it's like a vicious cycle, right? That reinforces the low self-esteem. You've got to break out of that at some point. And also, if you're like, well, I don't think I'm a passive communicator, one of the ways to maybe like identify that is, if you're thinking and you're like, people never consider my feelings, you're suffering silently, you rarely make eye contact, maybe you're withdrawn, usually hating conflict, pleasing to win approval. Those are all those kind of things that would indicate to you that you need to be more assertive, right?
Yeah,
and,
right.
And
hinting at things.
Friendly, not accommodating. And I think that's important distinction, because yes, you have to finesse and you can politely say things. Things might need to be prefaced depending on the topic. But you don't need to accommodate, you know what I'm saying? You can still be friendly while denying that. So I would say friendly means you're taking care of your loved ones, you're helping them in time of need, right? But on the other hand, you accommodate people if you're too over accommodating, you're caring for people at the expense of yourself.
Yeah, right. Yeah, self-sacrifice, gross energy. Yeah, that's all super, super great insights. Another area he talks about that is helpful to identify your boundaries is relational boundary. So that means appropriateness depending on what is your relationship with this person and what is the boundary. So, like going on a date with a client, if you're a coach or a therapist, that's violating a boundary. Or your boss asking you out. Okay, I mean, maybe those can be adapted, but you're kind of violating a boundary there. You need to be really aware. And so going into it, it's like helpful to have boundaries set up in the first place. So you can make that decision in wisdom when you're clear headed and not when you're emotional and you're thinking about maybe violating your boundaries, right? Next is sexual boundaries. So that's how you want to be touched. Do you know what your sexual boundaries are, what you're okay with and what you're not? Like instead of just, I don't know, whatever they want, right? Or vice versa. Like, how do you want to touch other people? What are you expecting? What is your desire there? And then that needs to be communicated and identified, right? So with both people. And then the last one he talked about was spiritual boundaries, which I can relate to. And that's what my beliefs are and how I practice those beliefs. So he was saying very few people, some people find their religion, but most people are kind of born into their religion. And so sometimes those boundaries can be violated from a very young age. This is how you think. This is how you feel. This is how you believe.
Or you know what? On contrast to that, I want to highlight that because on a previous episode, you were talking about how when you were so immersed in Mormonism, you didn't go hang out with the other kids, nearby because you were like, they're not Mormon. So in essence, you had too much of a boundary. So, and that's like my lesson in life, right? So now, normally that's aggressive communication, right? Like I'm right no matter what. I'm blaming everyone for shit, criticizing, humiliating. That's just a bully, piece of garbage, aggressive asshole. But a lot of us, again, you can kind of go one way or the other. So that's where I realized too, like I had that boundary up with vulnerability. You might have had that boundary up because religion was saying, don't bother with these people. And again, I don't know how we could have convinced you otherwise in that moment, but just something to look at for everyone out there in terms of your beliefs and how where are your boundaries too strong maybe, and they need to be broken down a little bit.
Yeah. And just making sure like, did that thought originally come from you? So now that I'm in a different place with my spirituality, I'm very aware of that. I feel like my boundaries are very healthy because I'm open to everything, but I'm not just jumping on it just because somebody else said it. For example, if somebody's telling me that this, I got some citrine right here, this is cool little crystal. I'm open to the fact that maybe crystals have energy and do these things, but I'm like not, I'm open to it. I'm not like dead set. Yes, somebody told me that citrine will bring me prosperity and it will, it's just like that kind of thing. Like I'm open to it. Also, for example, multiple lives, theories about multiple, I heard this guy talking to one of my friends one time and my friend one time on the phone, I wanted to like punch him in the face because he's like, this is how it works. So we have like infinite lives and we come and we do this. And then in the next life, it works like this. And I'm like, mother effer, you don't know that. You don't know that. None of us know. Any religious or spiritual teacher, they came on equal playing ground, just like we did. So like that might be their truth. This is
faith, not fact.
Yeah. That might be their truth. Yeah. And if it resonates with true for you, go for it. And that's just kind of how I see it now is like, sometimes people say things and I'm like, dude, I've had a personal experience in which I really actually do feel like when I go on top of a mountain, I feel like connected to something bigger than me. That feels real to me. So, so it's just like, is it coming innately from you or has it been placed in your head from somebody else? Just know what your boundaries are. And I think, for me, that's been a big lesson is just like being open. And I don't have a rigid boundary. I'm not like, no, I'm not going to believe anything any spiritual teacher tells me. I tell my kids all the time that I'm like, I have to still accept that Mormonism could be true, even though that's hard for me. If I can't accept that, then I'm doing the same thing I was doing before. So I'm open to anything, but I'm now just going with what feels true to me.
A great movie, by the way, a classic movie that just really hits home the idea of faith and what you believe versus what you can prove is a movie called Contact with Jodie Foster from back in the day. It's literally
Mhm.
one of the best films for that. It's, she's a scientist, she's a skeptic, and there's a religious guy, and she has an experience that, again, she can't prove, but she
Mhm.
knows. And so it's a really interesting movie for that. And I think kind of touches on it, which I
Yeah.
gave me goosebumps thinking about that film because it does it so well. I also just want to talk about like our preferences. They're just that. It's not right or wrong, right? It's your preference. Like
Right,
you get to
right.
have your own, you can say, and we've talked about like not justifying and things like that. But it's just so interesting that, like, for example, if, if a guy loves tall women, I'm 5 feet 2 inches tall, no amount of reason is going to, like, the guy's just attracted to what he's like. You have the right to have your preferences and things you like or don't like, whether right or wrong or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, if they're hurting other people and things like that, that's different. So own it. And like, what are your preferences? Also to this, I find this really interesting. So if you are a people pleaser or you're having issues with drawing boundaries and being assertive, it's so interesting. So let's break it down. This overriding need to like not disappoint someone,
Mhm.
it actually overrides your own disappointment though. That's what's so messed up. So basically,
Mhm.
and hopefully this makes sense. Like, why would you choose someone else's projected opinion that you created over your own opinion of the situation? Do you know what
Mhm.
I'm saying?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
it's very strange. So you hurt yourself when you do this. If you really look at it logically,
Yeah.
it's a little crazy because it really is your projected opinion that you created of what they might think or how they might see it. Yet you're holding yourself hostage because you're still not getting what you want. And it's keeping you in victim mode, right? That
Mhm.
it always keeps us in victim mode whenever we don't speak up or draw a boundary.
Yeah, because how
And
good of a job you're doing in life is dependent on somebody else's feedback, not your own self-confidence.
exactly. And also too, I notice, and maybe you've experienced this too. Like I know people who are great with drawing boundaries and being totally assertive communicators in relationships, romantic relationships and friendships, all kind of friendships. But when it comes to asking the boss for a raise or getting what they want to work, forget it. It's out the window. You might have a divide there. There are
Yeah.
people that are really good at it in one area. And I try to
Yeah.
point that out because I was talking to a friend the other day who was very like no BS to someone they're dating, just very like upfront shit, nothing negative, just really upfront. Like I was really impressed. And I was remembering when this person was struggling in a former job and they couldn't ask for what they want. And they kept in victim mode and kept all these hours on them, even though they weren't like, hey guys, this is not cool. I'm not working these amount of hours. It's not what I signed up for. They couldn't speak up there. And I pointed it out to them. I go, isn't it interesting? You are so no shit in your relationships. Like you could write a book on how to communicate in your
Mhm.
relationships romantically, but you get to the office and it's all out the window. So again, I think we can
And I
have that
think
duality sometimes.
so much of that look at childhood, right? Because I look at me and for as an example, I think I do a great job of boundaries like professionally or academic settings or things like that. Like that doesn't it's not hard for me. And I think I look back at my school career, I was always like very successful in school, very academic, like everything was healthy there, you know? But at home, actually, my sister and I were talking about this just this week because boundaries has been a big theme for me recently. And, you know, anybody who's had a mentally ill parent can probably relate to this. But we were talking about how with my mom, it just wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth it to speak up and speak your truth. You just kind of got to the point where you just would be like, okay, yeah, like, and just do what she wanted because otherwise you're going to sit in your room and get berated with her standing at your door for like 3 hours, you know, or you're like never going to live it down because it's just this, it becomes this chronic thing. So to avoid all of that fallout, you're just like, okay, yeah, mm-hmm. And so I think like in my relationship boundaries, that probably affected me also, you know, being molested as a kid. Like then there was this weird dynamic where it was like, that's the only time you're nice to me. Right. So I've seen that reflected in my romantic relationships. Like, I don't want to make you mad, you know, so I can see like where the stickiness is from childhood. And I'm sharing that just because I know I'm not alone. And I know there's
Well,
plenty of
that's
people
great.
out there
And that's
with
great
the
because you,
same.
in that moment, you actually are powerless. You're a kid at home. So I
Right.
understand being like, it's not even fucking worth it. It's just not worth it. Like I
Right.
get it because you understand what those consequences are. Those consequences aren't worth it. You know how it's going to play out. Um, that's different because you were dependent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, if you're in a relationship and you're dependent financially, you're dependent in a way you feel someone might be vindictive towards you. Yes, of course. I mean, get a therapist, work it out, find a way to detach or get what you need to get out of that relationship safely. But at the end of the day, when you're in a romantic relationship or a friendship, that's voluntary. No one's really got anything over you, and it can spill over from the
Yeah.
experience you're talking about. But you're in a different situation. You were locked in when you're at the house with this
Right.
kid. You're not
Yep.
locked in as an
Right.
adult, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so again, I think that's interesting because yeah, they just transfer. We transfer this
Yeah.
stuff.
And what I've learned over and over and over with changing my eating patterns, my, habits from like just organization and cleanliness and like just changing my life in so many ways. I've learned like you just have the opportunity to reparent yourself as an adult the way you wish your parents had done when you were a kid. Like, and if you're still harboring resentment, like, oh, I would be so much better if my parents would have been better, like you're just being a victim. And so like we have that opportunity. Now, I don't mean to be mean by that. Like I have had opportunities. I'm really grateful for the work of Byron Katie with Catherine Dixon because those deep stories, those are the things that have helped me fundamentally change how I'm showing up. So you can't surface it. Like you can't me just saying, oh yeah, I didn't have boundaries with my mom as a kid, or it's because that's why I don't have boundaries. That I have done zero work there. That's just a tiny acknowledgement. But you have to go see someone. Really, you need a mechanic. You need a therapist, you need a coach or somebody who's really skilled at that to help you go all the way into what the stories were and the beliefs were. And, one of my favorite questions she asks is what's the earliest memory you have of believing that thought? That is such a powerful question with any thought that you have. I love that question so much. I use it all the time with my clients. I'm like, when did you first feel like that in your life? And they're like, oh, I know. It was when this happened, And if you remember something stands out from childhood, there is some sort of strong emotional connection there, right? So pay attention to those things. I guess
That's
that
the
leads me.
parental garbage I talk about in Confident as Fuck. It's like
Yeah.
you ask that question and you go through and you can start to scrape off and see how I see why I'm doing that. Damn it. And like sometimes it could be something so stupid,
Mhm.
seemingly, that really affects something important in your life. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I love about the work is that you don't just recognize it. I feel like this is where the work differentiates than like therapy. I feel like in therapy, you recognize stuff and you kind of talk about how that's affecting your life. But what the work does, that's just a little tweak that's different, is if that had never, ever crossed your mind, if you had never, or at least this is how Catherine does it, if you had never thought that thought ever, how would you see whatever it is you're working on, relationships? How would you see men? How would you see success? How would you see mothers? Like, and so you dive in for an hour of how you would see life if you didn't have this belief pattern. So it allows you to see it differently. It is so cool. It is just like subconscious mind reprogramming to the max. So big
Yes,
fan of that.
and that's just show because honestly, she's great. I've had sessions with her too. Catherine Dixon, claritycoachinginstitute.com.
Yeah. Don't
Great.
book up her schedule too much, guys. Okay.
Yeah, no, she's really good. And here's the thing, doing the work is tough because and she's so skilled at it. You have to have someone really skilled like her
Yeah,
in order to do it
exactly.
right. You can't, it's really difficult, I think, to go on and look at like some of the questions in the workbooks of Byron Katie and actually get it. You have to be in front
You
of
won't
someone
get
who
there.
knows this. You won't get there. And what Catherine can do with you in a 1 or 2 hour session is honestly fascinating. I suggest if you've got something in your craw,
Mhm.
you're just whatever it is, can't get over something,
Yep.
can't do
Pattern.
something,
Some
whatever the
pattern you
pattern
keep
is, you hate
doing.
someone, you can't deal with someone, you're angry at some, what you can't forgive someone, whatever
Yep.
it is, it's really worth it to coach with Catherine. Yeah, that's
Yep.
amazing.
Yeah.
Look at that.
So I want to talk about types of boundaries.
Yeah.
So this is from Mark Groves as well. He talks about 3 types of boundaries. I don't know if this is his thing or, from somebody else. It's just a generalized thing, but he talks about healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries are when you're connected to yourself and you're connected to another person and everyone is safe in their own, like Catherine calls them, what realms of power. Everyone's safe in their own realm of power. Like they got their thing going on. I got my thing going on and we're also connected. And that's great. Those are healthy boundaries. The next type is a porous boundary. This is the one that I have been guilty of, definitely, and still am in many ways. And this is when we allow too much take on too much, absorb too much. We intrude into what is not ours. I'm so guilty of that. I want to help. It's like, just mind your own business. What else? We don't stand up for ourselves. We don't say no. We don't trust ourselves. We get overwhelmed. And then he says what we do is then we pivot into a rigid boundary because we took on too much in the first place. And that's the third, which is a rigid boundary, which it sounds like Eldest has been maybe what you were describing your MO a little bit more. And that's, we just block out, we don't allow people in, we don't open up, and we hold ourselves back from others. And it's more of a protective mechanism, right? So we would be like
By the way,
polar
that's some
opposites
lonely
there.
ass shit too. Both don't work out. The extreme of being aggressively assertive or having too many rigid boundaries to the other, there really has to be a fine, it's a fine balance. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have found the only way I've ever been able to grow in the area of boundaries is when
By
deep
applying
inside,
them.
what's that?
By applying them.
Exactly. Deep inside, I know what I need to do, but I can feel that wishy-washy, like, oh, I don't know. One thing that I was taught that's really helpful
That's a
is
good tip off if you're doing that in your head.
right. That's how I know I'm not respecting my boundaries, is when I'm back and forth, like super conflicted on if I should do something or not. And then, so what I've learned to do is I go into the energy of, I've already made that choice. How do I feel? And it's whatever that knee-jerk reaction is before the logical mind kicks in. Is it like a yay, or is it a, oh, like what is legitimately my energy? If it's like a yes, awesome, then I know that's what I need to do. And if it's like a yucky feeling or a stress, or it's just not the way, like I clearly don't want to do that thing. So I've had to really just practice making the decision in my mind and see what my knee-jerk reaction is. And then exactly what you said, having the freaking balls to apply it, having the courage to apply it, and that's when the pattern breaking happens. And that's been my biggest progress, is when I show up for me. And regardless of how the other person feels, if they are mad or sad or inconvenienced or whatever it is, my relationship with myself goes up so much because I just showed up for me. Like little girl Tara that didn't want to do that thing or does want to do that thing. Like I showed up for her and I was like, hey, this is just what I want. This is just how I feel. It's like just owning it. And that's where all the work has been. And that's been, I will say, scary, but also super, super, what's the word? Like empowering in a way. Cause I know that I know that I got me. Yeah.
I mean, and here's the thing, how worth it is it? Because you've been on the other side of it. Yeah, it's the first time you have to draw a boundary or do something you're not used to, like putting your foot down. It's not fun. It's not comfortable in the moment, right? But let me ask how you feel after you do it, though.
Man, like literally it feels like, okay, some of my friends were like, Tara, good job. You're doing a really good job at like honoring yourself and what you want with some of the stuff I've been going on in my personal life. And I'm like, that's because I learned the freaking hard way. I've learned the hard way for way too long. I have let stuff go on and on and on with all this pleasing porous boundary bullshit where I'm just like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, I just get more and more and more miserable. And because I've learned that and noticed that pattern, and then on the flip side, when I just freaking have the courage to do it quickly, my whole life, like I literally feel like I can think again, like I'm free, like I'm like out of hell. Like I feel like I've been stuck in this mental hell of just like my mind is just spinning and spinning and spinning and stress to like ultimate freedom. And like, oh my gosh, I can see everything else in my life again now because I'm out of this like logic of just not listening to myself. That's so like sometimes I think maybe not on everything, but for me, especially if I have a chronic stressor that's going through my mind a lot, it's usually because I'm not listening to myself and I'm trying to please somebody or give them what they want. And I'm trying to finagle some way in which I can make it work, but it's stressing me out and it just doesn't feel right. So watch that, that's just my insight. Watch that if that's happening. It's like, you kind of know what you need to do, but you probably just like shaming your, my habits will be like, oh, like, Tara, you just probably have growth work to do here. Like you probably need to
Pass that to
learn
yourself.
something. There's like I'll go into, there's something wrong with me because I want what's different than the other person does. Right. So I'll go into like what's wrong with me thinking for sure is a habit. I just need to grow here. I probably have messed up things. And then it's just like, man, I've learned so many times. It's like, no, Tara, you just don't want that. That's
Yeah, you
okay.
know, yeah, like don't. Well, and that's the thing too. I want to throw this out there because a lot of people who have their boundaries, like this used to happen to me a little bit, although I drew them pretty quickly. But if you're someone who, like, if you're the person of your friend or whatever who doesn't have kids, or you don't have a stressful job and you have time, you're gonna get asked for more fucking favors. People
Mm,
expect that shit. It's gonna happen.
wow.
Um, and I got used to over time seeing a pattern. I was like, oh, I see why everyone's always asking me to do shit because they're like, oh, she's a flexible schedule. She can do something during the day. She can, you know what I
Mm,
mean? And I started
mm,
to be like, there was a little part of me, and I think this came, I think this was because at the time I hadn't dealt with the shame around my disability. I felt bad and a little guilty that I was receiving like money, like that I didn't have to work and I could live this. Like, so I felt like
mm.
guilty that other people didn't, felt bad. Like, oh,
Wow.
I guess it made me feel like some kind of worth in my situation there. I don't know what it was, but I was like over giving there, or again, agreeing to do
Mm.
things that I didn't want to do because I felt like, well, I do have the time though, and they know doesn't fucking matter. I don't want to do it. End of story.
Right.
I will never do that anymore again.
Mhm.
I don't. And I just started to say no when people would ask me for this favor shit in the middle of the day or whatever it was when I didn't really want to do it. And it's not to say
Mhm.
that I won't ever do it. It's just that sometimes those people, again, because everyone's like, well, your schedule's free. Oh my gosh, I remember one time I was house sitting for a celebrity. I went off on them. But I said something like, hey, listen, I can't do that because doing that whole thing is going to take like 2 hours out of my day. And they didn't even know me or know me well. And they go, well, what else? Well, like, what else are you doing with your day? And I said, excuse fucking me? Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Do whatever the fuck I want. If I want to sit at home and eat bonbons all day, that's none of your goddamn business.
Right. Definitely.
I
That's
said, I don't want to do it. It takes 2 hours out of my day. We'll talk
wow.
about this in the offense versus defense. I didn't defend myself. I just was like, you're fucking rude for even asking that. Shut that
Yeah.
down. But again, like that's what you're going to get if you're one of those people. Like, well, what else do you have to do? I've got like your sisters, like, well, I've got 5 kids. Like you're free. You're not doing anything. Watch that. People get pressured, right? When you have that kind of thing. So I think that that's a tough scenario to be in when
And
you are the person that has that time.
and this goes back to our giving and receiving episode. Like if you're giving, but you have a resentful attitude about it, you're actually not giving, you're receiving because you're only doing it to get their approval or validation or some sort of gold star. But deep inside, if you're like, I don't even freaking want to do this, don't do it. You're being like, you're being phony, you know? So like literally, if you're like the person everybody asks you to help them move or everybody asks you to like babysit their kids all the time, if you don't want to, just say no, don't do it. And that to me, like I know one thing that's really important to me as like a single mom who is growing my business and 4 kids, like that the weekends I don't have my kids, I want a full day to myself. I want nothing to do. I want nothing on the schedule. I want to go to the gym for as long as I want. I want to go like just like if I want to go for a walk, I can. If I want to, I don't even care. Whatever I want to catch up on with work, whatever I freaking feel like doing, I need that. I need that day, like that, like day of space. And so, yeah, like sometimes people be like, hey, do you want to do this? And I'm like, I can't. Like they don't need an explanation. I don't need to tell them. They don't want to know what I have planned on Saturday. I just can't because I have plans with
And that's
myself.
the other thing too, setting boundaries. So
Yeah.
you decide on your values, right? You talked about that, like decide what your core beliefs are. What do you like? What you don't want? What your preferences are? What makes you comfortable in situations and not? And they're about you. Okay. So these are all about you, not in relation to someone else. So if you're like, well, my boundaries are that I don't like when no, cut Joe out of it. What do you want in life? But also to decide some consequences ahead of time because people are going to push your boundaries and you kind of got to be prepared for
Mm-hmm.
this when it happens and you need to draw a boundary. So you might have a script. You might know that someone keeps asking the same thing. You might know their personality, have some things ready to go. But also,
Another.
yeah, so
Oh,
those
go.
are like just setting boundaries, just kind of taking the time to kind of set them. And also too, like you're not going to like make empty threats and shit. Like if people violate your boundaries, then you don't make empty threats. You say what you mean and when you mean what you say. This
Mm-hmm.
is also really important in parenting. Like
Yeah.
don't tell the kids they're going to get grounded if they do something and then they do it, not do it. Nope. you got to show consequences for behavior and be
Totally.
consistent. So I think that that's what it takes with boundaries, figuring out what you need, what you want, what your core values are. But then also, if you do have to draw a very strong boundary, like with kids or with someone else, follow through. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone threaten, put out a threat on a boundary for someone, and it's 20 years now. They never drew the boundary they set. They continually violate it. Not a good story, people. It's not a good life. Yeah.
Another thing, when you were talking about like actually saying it, you can also become more skilled at setting boundaries. This is something I've learned. So a good way to do that is to observe somebody, how they set boundaries in a way that you admire, and just mimic that. So some people can set boundaries with style. I've seen some people, they set boundaries with humor a little bit, like, hey, will you go get us coffee on the way to work? And they're like, no, mother effer, I'm not getting you coffee. Get your own coffee. Like, that's it. They're kind of messing with them, but they're also setting the boundary. Like, instead of being like, okay. And they're like, why do they always ask me to get coffee? Ugh, get your own coffee, all in their mind. Like, that's your fault. Right. So, you can learn how to say it, but you can also become skilled at it. And that's what I'm working on right now in my life. Like, I look at strong leadership, and I find that people who are strong leaders are really good at setting boundaries in a really awesome way. Like, they're able to say it and still maintain a really good vibe in the relationship, being clear, but I think it can be an art, boundary setting being art. So like all things, I look for success patterns. And so I watch people, I'm like, how do they do that in a good way? Okay, that's cool. That's something for me to consider too. Like, maybe I'll try that. Last thing I have to bring this up. I do not want to miss this episode. I got to talk about the empath thing. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Empaths. Okay. There are a lot of people who are identifying in the last, 5 years or so as empaths.
5 months.
Yeah. So that's fine. And being empathic. Now, this can range all the way from like, you are actually like a psychic, to you consider yourself a person who takes on other people's feelings, and take on, their energy and things like that. How do I say this in the nicest way? If that is you, like, you need boundaries even more. And sometimes I do think that this is kind of a cop out for not having any boundaries. So those porous boundaries that I was talking about, allowing too much, taking on too much, like, why are you taking on their problems? Now, if it just came to you, then that does happen to me sometimes. I get like this freaking intuitive like download, like, help that person, but you still have to set the boundary with it when you do, of how much you are and aren't going to help that person. For example, every once in a while, I'll see somebody who's really obese and I feel the need to help them and they're asking me for help. They're not going to hire me as a coach. I'm like, this is what I can do for you. I can give you access to my Keto and Out program. Like, you can talk to me in the Facebook group. That's it. I'm not going to be like, yes, and I will coach you and we will have this ongoing, like, muddled, weird coaching relationship when I got a million things going on. Right. So that's an example of like, sure, being empathic, getting an intuitive hit to help someone, but recognizing how much I can and can't do for that person. I had that recently, like, somebody reached out and they were like, can I hire you for coaching? And at a time it was a man and I wasn't taking male clients. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry. But like, I can just let me know if you have any like really pressing questions. So having those boundaries, again,
that was a good one. Wait, I forgot you started off with that.
I guess I'll keep going. It'll come back to you. But like, intruding into what is not ours and not standing up for ourselves and not saying no, getting overwhelmed, like, all of that can be very characteristic sometimes, I think, of people who consider themselves empaths. And I'm not saying you're not empathic. I'm just saying, like, if you consider yourself empathic, you need boundaries the most. Because apparently you have something going on in your life where you take on other people's stuff. Like, you really, really need to sit down by yourself and define like what your boundaries are and what you will and won't take on. That's been a lesson for me lately as I've gone through this course, is like really identifying like, how involved am I going to get in other people's lives,
Yeah. And if you're super empathic, then maybe being a coach, therapist, etc., is probably not your jam. And I definitely be when watching like murder and, shows on TV. I mean, I know someone who is highly empathic, and they realized the boundary they needed to draw was that they were in a intensive school for a 3-year program, which was about spiritual psychology. But a lot of this is groups. People are talking about their personal stuff, right? Like they would in these kind of scenarios. And she was at a place where she was struggling with a health issue at the time. and it was too much. It was too much. And she realized, like, I'm too empathic. And when I'm hearing about all of these people's problems and issues going on when we're getting into these groups, it's affecting me like it's affecting my vibe. And the solution was she stopped going there. She had to for her. But that's like someone who's really, really an empath. And then again, okay, so if you know this and this is something important about you, maybe this is a conversation you need to have with friends at certain times of your life when maybe as an empath you're feeling overwhelmed or extra emotional, to say, like, I'm not sure I can even handle this conversation right now, or check with me first. But you have to draw some boundaries there if you're someone that's seeping in. Like, I know for me, I'm really super empathic when it comes, like, I almost can't. There's a movie that came out years ago called Precious, which won like an Oscar, and I still haven't been able to watch it because, like, I know it's about children getting beaten, and if I see it in a movie, it has to happen, okay? But like, I won't intentionally watch something that I know is about that because it just kills my soul to see kids either not eating or being beaten, right? Same as it would like murders and all sorts of like psychological bad stuff, negative things. Like, I try to stay away from it because it affects me. I don't want to hear about that. It's probably why I would be a terrible partner for someone who was a cop. I'd have to be like, I can't hear about your workday.
I think also
I can't hear about your workday because it's going to fuck me up. And I don't consider myself a crazy empath, but there are like informational boundaries. There's boundaries of things I want to let seep into my consciousness. So it kind of can be across the board, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there is some resiliency and experience that can happen over time with that. Because like when I was first starting to go into the life coaching side of things with my coaching, I would have days where I would go walk around the lake by my house and I would just freaking bawl because of the sadness of what these women were telling me had happened in their lives. Like, I would just cry and cry. I was like, this is so freaking heavy. This is like, I was just heartbroken for all of the pain. And just like, it was like, because there were so many people, I was like, gosh, like everyone is just in so much freaking pain. Like, it was very overwhelming at first, but now it's almost become like time management. Like when I first was coaching and I was like, you can call me anytime between 9 and 5. I'm just available to you. Like, there were no boundaries there. It's kind of become like that. Like I recognize, I almost expect there to be a lot of emotional trauma and pain now. And because I expect that and it's not like a shock factor, I'm like, okay, so I can get more proactive into the helping of like getting into the stories that were created because of that pain and trauma. And it's less of me being like, holy crap, that is so sad. I can't believe that kind of stuff happens to people. It's kind of like, I feel like farmers that grow up on a farm or ranchers, like if I had to go or a butcher or something, oh my gosh, I would be traumatized to like butcher an animal. But the people who do it all the time now, they're not like there's been like resiliency there, so I think there's a little bit of that too, cops and things like that. Like, they understand these things happen, but I'm sure when they first started, like, it was really heavy on them. So I think you can, if you're going to be in coaching, that's just my experience anyway, is like, it may be heavy at first. You're going to feel all the feels because you didn't realize how freaking bad people have it sometimes, even if it's just health coaching, you're like, dang, dude, these people are struggling. But once you get over the shock factor and you really just recognize people are really struggling, you can become less emotionally reactive about it. So
yeah, and especially when you start to shift it from looking at like, oh my God, this is horrible, to like, hold on, let's get to the help.
Yeah.
Can I help? Or let's move this. And then that's really the coaching, like, positivity angle. Yeah, I don't really know that I have much more. I mean, I probably have a lot more to say on this topic. We could go forever.
I think that's,
I think it's important to really look at what are you comfortable with, what are you not, and just ask yourself some questions like, where have I let my boundaries get violated? What was that situation like? If I could turn it around and go back in time, how would I maybe act differently? Would I say something different? Yeah.
And what were you getting out of it? Like what was that? Because we tend to lack boundaries because we want to be safe. We tend to we somehow we're getting something out of it where it's like, they will like me, or they will think I'm a good girlfriend, or they will think I'm a good coach, or they will, or they will love me. They will think I'm fun. That was the last thing I was going to say, was that like a lot of times when we lack boundaries, we have no idea. We don't realize we're lacking boundaries. There's no awareness there. If there was, you wouldn't be doing it. And so the last thing I'll say is a lack of boundaries can be disguised as certain things I have found myself. One of them is being nice. So watch yourself. Are you being nice? It's kind of the point where I'm kind of like, I don't trust people when I feel like they're just being nice. I'm like, why are you doing that? It's some weird energy. What do you need here? Ugh, what's the underlying shit going on with you? So being nice, if you're just being nice all the time, that can be you not having boundaries. Being fun. Lack of boundaries can be disguised as being fun. Whatever somebody wants, you're up for it. Yes, that sounds awesome. You don't even think to ask yourself, like, if you can really do that or if you really want to. It's just this knee jerk. And I'm so guilty of this, like knee jerk, like, yeah, let's do it. Oh my gosh, yes, that sounds fun. And then later I'm like, wait, that's terrible. Like, so we've talked about that in other episodes, but just like having that moment of checking in with self of like, can I actually do that? But that was a hard one for me to break because I had tied my sense of funness in with not having boundaries of just doing whatever people wanted. Like that makes me this fun, likable person. Another way it gets disguised is, yes, again, like being really empathetic with people to the point of like, now you're like serving them and doing all these things for them, to like kind of show that you're this empathetic, nice person. That's fine to do that, but just make sure you're not just doing that just so they will like you. Like make sure it's genuine, So I think those three things, being nice, being fun, and being like overly empathetic and, slathering somebody with service or, over affection, those can all be disguised forms of a lack of boundaries.
That's awesome.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
All
Thanks,
right,
guys.
everyone. Yeah. Also, make sure, if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify or somewhere else, we do have video episodes on our YouTube page, which is youtube.com/kickasslifepodcast. And we will see you all next week.